Sentence you to 20 years in state prison.
Courtrooms are meant for justice, but sometimes they turn into scenes of shocking events with things going horribly wrong.
There will be an automatic appeal. You have the right to an appeal. Mr. Glazer, is that going to be handled by you?
Your wife and kids get raped.
These female criminals, notorious for their ruthless crimes, met their end in the most unexpected and brutal way right in front of a judge. From carefully planned violence to sudden attacks, the events will leave you speechless. Join us as we uncover the most chilling stories of female courtroom tragedies. Number 14. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos was a name that sent shivers through Florida. She said she acted in self-defense, but her violent actions led to the deaths of 7 men. It wasn't just her crimes that shocked people, it was how she behaved in court. Aileen showed no regret and left everyone unsettled with her eerie final words before her execution. Born in 1956, Aileen had a rough childhood filled with mistreatment and neglect. By adulthood, she had turned to prostitution and had many run-ins with the law. Later, her violent acts made her one of the most infamous figures in true crime history. Aileen insisted that she only murdered because her victims mistreated her or were about to harm her. Her first victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old who owned an electronics store. Aileen said he had hurt her, so she shot him to protect herself. But as time went on, 6 more men were put to death, which made people question her claim of self-defense. The second man was David Andrew Spears, a 47-year-old construction worker. His body was found naked by a highway with 6 gunshot wounds. Then came Charles Edmund Carskadden, a 40-year-old who worked part-time at rodeos. He was found with 9 gunshot wounds. Aileen's spree continued with Peter Abraham Seams, a 65-year-old retired merchant seaman. His body was never found, but his car was recovered and Aileen's fingerprints were inside. The 5th man was Troy Burress, a 50-year-old delivery driver who had been shot twice. The 6th was Charles Richard Humphreys, a 56-year-old retired Air Force major and former police chief. He was found fully clothed and shot 6 times. Her final victim was Walter Gino Antonio, a 62-year-old truck driver. His nearly nude body was discovered, and he had been shot 4 times. By January 1991, Aileen was arrested, and before the year ended, she had admitted to the murders. Even though Aileen Wuornos claimed self-defense, her actions came across as planned and violent. During her trial at the Marion County Courthouse in Ocala, Florida, the jury didn't believe her story. They found her guilty and sentenced her to death. After hearing the verdict, Aileen lost her temper. She angrily cursed at everyone in the courtroom, including the judge. In her final interview, Aileen said something strange. She claimed the police knew about her crimes, but didn't stop her because they wanted to pin the label of serial murderer on her. Before her execution in 2002, she made several eerie comments. Her last words stood out because they were so odd. She said something about returning and mentioned events that sounded apocalyptic. Her exact words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, Big Mothership, and all. I'll be back." Now, moving on to our next case, we'll look at a shocking story where a police officer committed a terrible crime by shooting an innocent man in his own home. Number 13. Amber Geiger. Former police officer Amber Geiger was convicted for the heartbreaking shooting of Botham Jean, a young black man. This incident happened on the night of September 6, 2018, when Ky'Andrea accidentally entered Jean's apartment, thinking it was her own. While testifying in Dallas County Court, Amber broke down in tears, insisting it was a terrible mistake. She had just finished a 14-hour shift and lived one floor below Jean in the same apartment complex. When she entered the wrong apartment, she saw Jean sitting in his living room, eating ice cream. Thinking he was an intruder, she fired her gun twice, hitting him in the chest. Botham Jean, a 26-year-old accountant originally from St. Lucia, worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers. His death caused outrage across the nation, especially since he was unarmed. The fact that Ky'Andrea, a white officer, shot a black man in his own home only added to the anger. Many saw it as another example of racial bias in policing, sparking protests and demands for justice. Initially, Ky'Andrea was charged with manslaughter, which caused even more protests because many felt it wasn't enough. Later, the charge was upgraded to murder. During her trial in 2019, prosecutors pointed out that Ky'Andrea ignored obvious signs she was in the wrong apartment, like the bright red doormat outside Jean's door. They also argued that instead of entering what she thought was a burglar's home, she should have followed police protocol by calling for backup. Despite her claim that she feared for her life and thought she was protecting herself, the jury found her guilty of murder on October 1st, 2019. The next day, Amber Ky'Andrea was sentenced to 10 years in prison. During the sentencing, a deeply emotional moment happened when Botham Jean's younger brother, Brant, stood up in court and said he forgave Amber Ky'Andrea. He even asked if he could hug her. This act of forgiveness was seen by many as a powerful and moving gesture. However, not everyone felt the same. Some believed the 10-year sentence was far too light for the loss of an innocent life. Botham's father also said he forgave Ky'Andrea, but admitted he wished her sentence had been longer. Later, Ky'Andrea's lawyers tried to appeal her conviction. They argued that she had made a mistake and that there wasn't enough evidence to prove she intended to take the life of Jean. Despite their efforts, the Texas Court of Appeals upheld her conviction in 2021. Amber Ky'Andrea is currently serving her 10-year sentence, with the possibility of parole in 2024. Number 12. Sabrina Lehman. This next case is about Sabrina Lehman, a woman from California who was found guilty of teaming up with her lover, Jonathan Hearn, to murder her husband, Robert Lehman. Sabrina and Robert were known for hosting fun parties and having an active social life. But things took a dark turn when Sabrina started an affair with Jonathan, who worked as a firefighter. Sabrina eventually wanted to leave her marriage, but Robert didn't want a divorce. This caused more problems in their relationship, especially as Sabrina began drinking more. On August 17, 2014, Robert was shot while working at the BNSF rail yard in Tehachapi. At first, it looked like a robbery, but investigators quickly realized the scene had been staged. A voicemail from Jonathan made detectives suspicious. It hinted that the murder wasn't random, but part of a plan. Detectives then wiretapped Sabrina and Jonathan's phones, but couldn't find solid proof. So, they fed Sabrina fake information to see how she would react. Sabrina panicked and called Jonathan using a burner phone. On November 18, 2014, both of them were arrested. Investigators found evidence at Jonathan's home that matched what was seen in surveillance footage. At first, Sabrina was released because there wasn't enough evidence to directly link her to the crime, but Jonathan stayed in custody. Later, Jonathan agreed to a plea deal and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He also testified against Sabrina. He said Sabrina had helped plan Robert's murder and even tried to poison him with arsenic. Jonathan also claimed that Sabrina had given him information about Robert's work schedule and where the murder would take place. But during her trial in the Kern County Superior Court, Sabrina denied being involved in any of it. She said she never planned the murder or tried to poison her husband. Her defense team argued that Jonathan's plea deal gave him a reason to lie. Sabrina said she had trusted Jonathan and had only shared personal details because she was worried about the affair being exposed. On February 21, 2018, Sabrina was found guilty of 4 out of 6 charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, solicitation of murder, and conspiracy. However, she was cleared of the charge about trying to poison Robert. Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Later, she tried to get a new trial, but the California Supreme Court turned down her appeal. Now let's move on to the next case, which involves a violent carjacking that led to serious consequences for one person. Number 11. Ky'Andrea Cook. Ky'Andrea Cook was a 19-year-old whose courtroom video went viral when she cried, while her mother wailed in the background. Ky and her boyfriend, Kendrick Bass, had come up with a plan to steal cars by using dating apps to trick people into meeting them in remote spots. On March 22, 2017, Ky used the Meet Me app to lure Perry Nita to a meeting place in South Daytona. Perry brought his friend Emmanuel along for safety. When Perry and Emmanuel arrived, Ky got into their pickup truck, but Kendrick, who was hiding in the back seat, jumped out wearing a ski mask and red hoodie. He had a gun and ordered Perry to get out of the truck. Things escalated when Emmanuel tried to defend Perry, and Kendrick fired his gun twice, hitting Emmanuel in the stomach. Ky and Kendrick ran off, leaving Perry to rush Emmanuel to the hospital. Thankfully, Emmanuel survived the shooting. Despite this close call, Ky and Kendrick kept committing crimes. Within a day of the shooting, they stole another car, but this time without using violence. Kendrick managed to avoid getting caught for almost a year, but Ky was arrested shortly after the shooting. She was charged with serious crimes, including carjacking with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and aggravated battery. During her trial in the Orange County Circuit Court, her public defender worked out a plea deal with the prosecutors. Ky and her mother were told she might get probation or community control since she had no previous criminal record. Believing this, Ky agreed to a no-contest plea to all charges except conspiracy. But on June 27, 2017, she was shocked when the judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Later, the judge allowed Ky to withdraw her plea because of a misunderstanding with her attorney. On May 14, 2018, her sentence was reduced to 11 years in prison and 20 years of probation. As part of her new plea deal, Ky'Andrea agreed to help prosecutors with their case against Kendrick. She also accepted responsibility for sharing the costs of restitution with him. Kendrick was arrested on January 26, 2018, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Ky is currently serving her sentence at the Homestead Correctional Institution and is expected to be released in December 2027. Kendrick, on the other hand, is serving his time at the Hamilton Correctional Facility and is scheduled to be released in 2037. Number 10. Michelle Carter. Michelle Carter, a 17-year-old from Plainville, Massachusetts, became widely known for her involvement in the tragic death of her boyfriend, Conrad Roy. Conrad, born on September 12, 1995, was a bright student with a promising future, but he battled severe depression and had attempted self-immolation in the past. Michelle and Conrad met in Florida in 2012 and stayed connected through texts and calls, even though they lived about 35 miles apart. By 2014, Michelle was on medication for anxiety and depression, while Conrad struggled with both depression and therapy, which made their mostly digital relationship even more complicated. In the summer of 2014, Michelle's behavior took a dark turn. She began encouraging Conrad to take his own life. She sent him many text messages urging him to commit self-murder and even gave him detailed instructions on how to do it. On July 12, 2014, Conrad decided to follow through with Michelle's encouragement. He drove to a Kmart parking lot in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, where he used his truck to poison himself with carbon monoxide. While this was happening, Michelle kept sending him text messages and even made a phone call telling him to get back into the truck when he hesitated. Michelle's texts and actions became key evidence in the case against her. Prosecutors argued that her constant encouragement played a big part in Conrad's decision to end his life. After Michelle was arrested, the case was widely known as the texting self-immolation case. On June 16, 2017, Judge Lawrence Mones found Michelle guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Michelle was initially sentenced to 12 years in prison, with 15 months to be served and the rest suspended, plus 5 years of probation. However, her sentence was later reduced to just 15 months, and she was released early on January 23, 2020, due to good behavior. Now, let's move on to our next case, involving a woman who shocked the nation with the brutal murder of her ex-boyfriend. Number 9. Jodi Arias. Jodi Ann Arias, born on July 9, 1980, became infamous for the brutal murder of her ex-boyfriend, Travis Victor Alexander, on June 4, 2008. Travis was murdered in his home in Mesa, Arizona. The crime scene revealed the horrific details of his death. He had been stabbed 27 times, had his throat slit, and suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The medical examiner found defensive wounds on his hands, showing he had fought back. At first, Jodi denied being at Travis's house on the day of the murder, but later she gave several different and conflicting stories, including claiming it was a robbery gone wrong and that she acted in self-defense. During the investigation, authorities found Jodi's rental car with red stains and missing floor mats. They also recovered deleted photos from Travis's damaged camera, which showed both of them in intimate poses, and later a photo of him in the shower before his death. Blood evidence further linked Jodi to the crime scene. In the days after the murder, Jodi's behavior seemed odd. She traveled to Utah to visit another man, Ryan Burns, and attended business meetings as if nothing had happened. People noticed she had changed her appearance by dyeing her blonde hair a darker color. She also had cuts on her hands, which she explained by saying she had injured herself on broken glass. Jodi was indicted on July 9, 2008, and arrested on July 15th. Her trial began in 2012, attracting intense media attention. The prosecution argued that Jodi had planned the murder, using a handgun, and even planned her visit to Travis's home. They presented evidence, such as gas station receipts and a timeline of her trip to support their claim of premeditation. Jodi's defense team tried to argue that she was a victim of domestic violence. They claimed that Travis had been abusive and that Jodi acted out of fear for her life. They brought in expert witnesses to support their claims of PTSD and domestic violence. However, the prosecution maintained that the brutal nature of the crime and Jodi's actions afterward showed that it was a deliberate murder, not an act of self-defense. The trial, which started in January of 2013, received a lot of media attention. On May 8, 2003, Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury couldn't agree on whether she should get the death penalty, leading to a mistrial for that part of the case. On April 13, 2015, Arias was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing phase was filled with more legal drama, including motions for mistrials and appeals. Arias's defense team kept fighting the outcome, claiming there were problems with the evidence and how the jurors behaved. But despite their efforts, the conviction and life sentence were kept in place. As of 2023, Jodi Arias is serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. Number 8. Samantha Grigg. On February 15, 2014, Samantha Grigg, who was a high school senior at the time, along with two accomplices, Brendan Heim, who was 16, and Terrell Bredenitz, who was 18, drove to Dustin Froker's apartment in East Lansing with the plan to rob him. Froker, known for selling illegal substances, was targeted because of the cash he carried. Grigg, who was aware of the plan, drove the vehicle while Heim and Bredenitz carried out the attack. After picking up Froker from his apartment, the group drove him to different ATMs, forcing him to withdraw money. During the drive, Heim started beating Froker with brass knuckles in the back seat of the speeding SUV. The attack was so severe that Froker eventually decided to jump out of the moving vehicle while it was speeding on Highway 69. He suffered terrible injuries and was left on the highway, partially clothed, where authorities later found him. He died from his injuries. Grigg was caught and charged with manslaughter and unarmed robbery. During the trial, she expressed deep remorse for her actions, tearfully apologizing to Froker's family and saying that she never meant to hurt him. However, her apology didn't lessen the pain felt by Froker's loved ones. In the end, Grigg was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Number 7. Erica Mae Butts. Erica Mae Butts was born on July 15, 1997, in Somerville, South Carolina. Erica grew up in a tough environment with a childhood full of instability and trouble. It was during this challenging time that she met Shanita Latrice Cunningham, a woman who would become both her lover and partner in crime. Shanita, who was 5 years older than Erica, had her own history of criminal behavior. Together, they formed a dangerous and toxic bond that would eventually lead to a tragic event. Serenity, a sweet and innocent child who was the daughter of Shanita's ex, became the victim of their anger and hatred. As Erica and Shanita's relationship became more difficult, they took out their frustrations on the young girl, seeing her as something standing in the way of their happiness. The maltreatment Serenity endured is too horrifying to describe, but it's clear that she suffered greatly at the hands of those who were supposed to care for her. During the trial, witnesses shared chilling accounts of what Serenity went through in the days before her death. On March 12, 2013, just 3 days after the murder, Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham were arrested. The trial of Erica and Shanita received a lot of media attention, with people across the country following the case. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution made a strong case against the two women, proving their guilt. Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham were found guilty of the murder of Serenity Richardson and were sentenced to 20 years to life in prison with no chance of parole. The emotional impact of the verdict was immediate. Erica and Shanita, who had kept their emotions in check during the trial, suddenly collapsed on the floor, crying and gasping for breath. However, this next case involved a suspect who nearly escaped justice by fleeing to another country. Number 6. Kimberly Singler. Kimberly Singler, a 36-year-old mom from Colorado Springs, is facing serious charges in connection with the deaths of her two young children. In December of 2023, she's accused of doping, shooting, and stabbing her 9-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son. She's also said to have tried to unalive her 11-year-old daughter, who survived and has given important testimony. After the tragedy, Singler fled to the United Kingdom, where she was arrested in London on December 30th, 2023. Since then, her case has sparked a long legal fight over whether she should be sent back to the United States. In January of 2025, a British judge decided that Singler could be extradited to face charges in Colorado, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child mistreatment. Singler's legal team has argued against the extradition, pointing to European human rights laws that say life sentences without parole are cruel and unusual punishment. However, the judge ruled that sending her back to Colorado was legal, noting that there is a process for clemency in Colorado, though it's rarely used. The case has received a lot of attention because of the disturbing nature of the crimes and the complicated legal issues. Singler's surviving daughter initially backed her mother's story that an intruder was to blame, but later admitted that Singler had actually attacked her and her siblings. This testimony, along with DNA evidence tying Singler to the crime scene, has been crucial in building the case. Number 5. Megan Huntsman. Megan Huntsman, a mother from Pleasant Grove, Utah, left the nation in shock with the horrifying crimes she committed. Between 1996 and 2006, Huntsman took the life 6 of her newborn babies just after giving birth to them. She hid their bodies in her garage, wrapped in plastic, and packed away in boxes. The shocking discovery came in April of 2014 when her estranged husband, Darren West, was cleaning out the garage and found the remains. Huntsman confessed to murdering the babies, explaining that her addiction to methamphetamine played a major role. She said she was so consumed by her addiction that she couldn't care for the babies, and she ended up strangling or suffocating them right after they were born. The case got a lot of attention because of how many victims there were and how long the murders had been happening. In her trial, Huntsman pled guilty to 6 counts of first-degree murder. In February of 2015, she was sentenced to 6 terms of 5 years to life in prison, with 3 terms served one after the other and 3 served at the same time. This means she'll serve at least 30 years before she can be considered for parole. The case raised a lot of questions about how such a series of crimes could go unnoticed for so long. Friends and neighbors were stunned, saying they had no idea Huntsman had been pregnant multiple times. But it's not just women in North America who have been convicted of violent crimes. The next case took place in Canada, just next door to the United States. Number 4. Elizabeth Wettlaufer. Elizabeth Wettlaufer, a former nurse from Ontario, Canada, became one of the most infamous serial murderers in the country's history. Born in 1967, Wettlaufer worked at several long-term care homes where she carried out her terrible acts. Between 2007 and 2016, she took the life of 8 elderly patients and tried to unalive 6 others by injecting them with insulin. Her crimes went unnoticed for almost 10 years, mainly because her victims were elderly and often had other health problems. She was finally caught in October of 2016 after confessing to her crimes at a rehab center. Her confession led to a police investigation, which confirmed her involvement in the deaths and the attempted murders. During her trial, Wettlaufer pled guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated violence. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The case shocked the nation and sparked a public inquiry into how long-term care homes in Ontario were regulated and monitored. Wetlaufer's background showed a troubled woman who had struggled with substance misuse and mental health problems. She battled alcoholism and illegal substance addiction, which she said played a role in what she did. Despite being fired from several nursing jobs because of mistakes with medication and her addiction issues, she kept finding work in healthcare. Number 3. Teresa Youngblood. Teresa Youngblood, who is 21 years old, is facing 2 charges related to the death of Border Patrol agent David Maland, who was 44 on January 20th, 2024, in Coventry, a small town around 20 miles from the Canadian border. According to an FBI affidavit, a border agent stopped Youngblood and Felix Bouwholt on Interstate 91 for an immigration check. At that moment, Bouwholt seemed to have an expired visa based on a database from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. However, investigators later found out that his visa was actually up to date. Youngblood, who was driving Bouwholt's car, got out and unexpectedly opened fire on Maland and other officers, the FBI claims. Bouwholt tried to draw a gun, but was shot, according to the affidavit. At least 1 border agent fired at Youngblood and Bouwholt, but authorities haven't said who fired the fatal shots. U.S. Acting Attorney Michael Drescher said in a statement, "This tragedy shows just how much law enforcement officers risk their lives to protect our communities and country. We honor them and Agent Maland's memory by carrying out our duty to pursue justice." The investigation into Youngblood and Bouwholt began on January 14th, after a hotel employee reported seeing Youngblood with a gun and her and Bouwholt wearing black tactical gear. Investigators had been keeping an eye on the pair ever since. Before the shooting, investigators saw Bouwholt leave a Walmart in Newport, just north of Coventry, carrying 2 packages of aluminum foil. The affidavit mentioned that Bouwholt was seen wrapping objects that couldn't be identified while sitting in the passenger seat. After the shootout, authorities searched the car and found several items, including cell phones wrapped in foil, a ballistic helmet, night vision goggles, respirators, and ammunition, the FBI said. They also discovered a package of shooting range targets, some of which had been used, 2-way radios, around a dozen electronic devices, travel and lodging details for multiple states, and what appeared to be a journal. The Public Defender's Office, which will represent Youngblood, didn't reply to a voicemail asking for more details. Someone who answered a phone number listed for Youngblood's family in Washington state said he was Youngblood's grandfather, but refused to comment. No one answered the door at a house in Seattle that was connected to Youngblood, and neighbors also declined to speak. Joan Maland, Maland's aunt, spoke on behalf of the family, saying they wouldn't comment on the arrest. The family did release a statement thanking everyone for their support. To think that people who never knew David Christopher Maland personally would offer condolences and kind words has been more than we could have imagined, the family said. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Our grief is ongoing, and we ask that you keep praying for us. And as for the next case, it's really disturbing, so prepare yourself for the story of the Granny Ripper. Before that, it's time for our subscribers' pick of the day. This is a case so bizarre, it could be straight out of a Hollywood thriller. Now, before we dive in, let me stress that these reports are still unconfirmed, but the story goes like this. A woman facing first-degree murder charges is sitting in court when, out of nowhere, she leaps from the defense table and charges at a witness on the stand. What happens next? Chaos. Complete chaos. She's shot multiple times right there in the middle of the courtroom. The judge, stunned, immediately adjourns the trial. Paramedics rush in, but despite their efforts, she dies before ever hearing her fate from the jury. While we're fairly certain she wasn't getting away with murder, the big questions remain: who was she? And what drove her to pull off such a shocking stunt? What do you think? Could something like this really happen in a courtroom, or is this all just wild fiction? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Number 2. Tamara Samsonova. Tamara Samsonova, known as the Granny Ripper, is a notorious Russian serial murderer. She was born on April 25, 1947, in Uzhur, Krasnoyarsk Krai. After finishing school at Moscow State Linguistic University, she moved to St. Petersburg. There, she worked for the in-tourist travel agency and lived what seemed like a normal life, hiding her dark side. Her crimes were exposed in 2015 when she was arrested for taking the life of her 79-year-old friend, Valentina Nikolaevna Ulanova. Samsonova had been living with Ulanova, and after an argument, she poisoned her, cut her body into pieces, and scattered the remains around St. Petersburg. This brutal act led to her capture and a deeper investigation. During the investigation, police found Samsonova's detailed journals, which described her involvement in many murders over 20 years. She admitted to murdering at least 14 people, including her husband, Alexei Samsonov, who disappeared in 2000. Her usual method was to poison her victims, cut up their bodies, and get rid of the remains in different parts of the city. Samsonova's case attracted a lot of media attention because of how shocking and disturbing her actions were, along with her calm behavior during the trial. She was often seen smiling and waving at cameras, which made her nickname, Granny Ripper, even more chilling. Her mental health became a key issue, as she had been hospitalized many times for psychiatric treatment and was believed to suffer from schizophrenia. In November of 2015, Samsonova was deemed unfit to stand trial and was sent to a psychiatric hospital for care. Number 1. Joanna Dennehy. Joanna Dennehy, born in August 1982 in St. Albans, Hertfordshire, became known as a ruthless British serial murderer because of the infamous Peterborough ditch murders. In March of 2013, Dennehy went on a deadly rampage, taking the lives of 3 men and attempting to unalive 2 others over the course of just 10 days. Her victims included her landlord, Kevin Lee, and 2 housemates, Lukasz Slaboszewski and John Chapman. She tricked them into trusting her with promises of illegal substances and coitus, only to stab them to death. Afterward, Dennehy dumped their bodies in ditches around Peterborough, which led to the case being called the Peterborough Ditch Murders. But she didn't stop there. She went to Hereford, where she randomly attacked 2 men who were walking their dogs. Thankfully, both survived. What drove Dennehy was a twisted need for fun and entertainment. She admitted that she found murder to be moreish, enjoying the rush it gave her. She had an accomplice, Gary Stretch, who helped her dispose of the bodies and took her to Hereford. During her trial, Dennehy's chilling behavior shocked everyone. She laughed and showed no guilt, simply saying, "I have pleaded guilty, and that's that." Psychiatrists diagnosed her with psychopathic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. Her troubled past included narcotics misuse, self-harm, and a rough relationship with her family, but no one saw her violent nature coming until her murdering spree started. In November of 2013, Dennehy pleaded guilty to all charges, including 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. She was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order, meaning she will never get out. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.